right, welcome back. All right, so we are, as you know, on the second half of the semester, right, and focusing on the mostly on learning about how to create the server side, right, in a client-server application, right. The first half, we focus on implementing the user interface, right, in as the client of our client-server application. Right, we used React.js, HTML, CSS for the front end, right, and then now we're focusing on Node.js and MongoDB for our back end. Right, we last time we met, we discussed how to create servers, HTTP servers using Node.js and Express. Right, we learned about creating all sorts of routes and how to integrate, right, the client server with the client with the server through an HTTP RESTful web API. Right, we practice how to send information back and forth between the client and the server, manipulating data structures, arrays, objects, and so today we're going to continue that. Right? We're going to take a look at how is it that we can integrate the Kanbas application, right, that we've been implementing the user interface for the last several weeks. Right? And so now today we're going to learn, how is it that we can move a lot of the data manipulation that we already implemented in the user interface, right? We can migrate that to the server. The server should have been manipulating the data all along, right? But we didn't have a server back then, but now we do. Right, so we're going to move all the data structures and operations of creating, reading, updating, and deleting courses, modules, users, assignments, right? All those data structures that we currently have in the user interface, right? In the React application, we're going to move it over to the server side, right? Where it should have been all along, right? And so we're going to learn how to expose the operations of CRUDing all these data structures and and storing the state of the application in state variables that live on the server, meaning, right, that any changes that we make on the user interface, right, will persist on the server, right, in variables and data structures that live in the memory of the server. Obviously, if we restart the server, right, all those changes go away, right? It resets it to its initial state. To make it truly permanent, right, we either need to persist this to the file system, perhaps in a JSON file, which now we can, right, because we are running on a server. We don't have the limitations of no access to the file system. We have full access to the operating system. We can do everything we want. Or, right, the option is either store it, persist it to the file system, or even better, right, that we're going to be discussing next week, is store it in a database, right? Use a long-term storage solution such as MySQL, SQL Server, or what we're going to be doing is using MongoDB. Okay, so that's for our next lesson, our next lecture. Uh, Today we're going to start looking at how we can migrate a lot of the data manipulation over to the backend. Okay. A couple of administrative things here. We did move the due dates for a couple of our assignments, so that just to give you a little more time. But this is as far as we can push it back, since we are abutting to the end of the semester, right, and to the due date for the project. So I did move assignment 5 and assignments 5 and assignment 6 to give you a couple more days. And so that should be sufficient. And also the new quiz should be available, and also we'll start talking about databases next lecture. Okay. Also, you should be working on your project feverishly. You should have identified some folks that you might want to work with, right, for the remainder of the semester. You have plenty of skills to get started, right? You definitely can start working on the user interface, right? Creating all sorts of prototypes for the screens, start styling it so that it looks polished and finished and professional, right? You can implement a lot of the navigation between the multiple screens, and you can create, some dummy data that either in the user interface or the back end, right? And start, rendering something useful, and so that represents your final product. So yeah, so please get that going. Don't wait till the end of the semester. It gets very hectic at the end of the semester. Everybody's scrambling to wrap up the semester. I'm sure you have many other courses that you have to concern yourselves. So yeah, don't wait till the last minute to work on this. Um, Now you are free to use other infrastructures, right? So you don't have to use React.js or Node.js for the backend or even MongoDB, right? So as you can play around with perhaps other technology stacks such as maybe Angular or Vue.js for the front end. For the middle tier, you could use Python or C Sharp, right? And for the database, you might want to try SQL Server or whatnot. Okay. Obviously, a lot of what we've been implementing throughout the semester, such as being able to log in, sign up, profile, and all this will be connected to a database already. You can reuse all that for your project. Although, if you're going to use a different infrastructure, you're going to find yourself that you need to recreate all that from scratch, right? Because that is a requirement. Whatever project you decide to go, whether it's the quizzes or whether it's a social network and whatnot, right? Those all require that you implement a way of identifying yourself, signing up, profile. And so if you use the infrastructure that we've been working throughout the semester, you get that for free. Okay. But nevertheless, right, feel free to explore other things. Also, as you know, there's two options for the project. There's the quizzes option, right, which is it just basically keep extending the Canvas application. And the other option is the what I call the social network option, but I don't mean social network in the sense of implementing, a Facebook, right, or Instagram or Twitter or whatever it's called today. So I don't mean a social network in that sense, but so it needs to be an application where users can interact with one another, right? They can, perhaps some folks are creators of some content, and some other users are the consumers of that content. I mean, you could say that the Kanbas application that we've been building so far falls in that category, right? It is somewhat of a social network in that faculty and students come to collaborate, right? Where you have faculty producing content that is meant to be consumed by students, right? And they collaborate through the topic of academics, right? And uh, faculty create courses and modules, and students consume that content. And there's a relationship between the users, right, where they can either follow each other, they can take an exam, a quiz, they can submit something, and so that's the way they collaborate or they interact with one another. So it doesn't have to be the social network in the social sense, right? But as long as users can interact, collaborate, right, and create content, one to many, many to many relationships and whatnot. So that falls into that category. So it's much more broader than just a social network. So it's a generic application where users can collaborate. Okay. Anyway, yeah. So towards the end of the semester, I will send out a checklist that represents the requirements of the project, which is the same documents that I already shared with you in the assignments, right? The P assignment, but written formatted in a checklist format, right? So and that list is going to be used, you know, when your project gets graded, right? When you present your project to the TA, right? The TA and yourself are going to go through that list, right? And check off that you have completed all those requirements. So please use that list, kind of like to practice the presentation before you come to the presentation, so that you can quickly go and demonstrate all those features to the TA, and you can make it very easy. Just go check off. Yeah, Can you log in? Yes. Can you cha modify your profile? Yes. Can you create some content? Yes. Can you query a third-party API? Yep. Right. So yeah, so I'll be sharing that with you, which is basically the requirements document that you already have, but in the format as a checklist. Right. So I'll be sharing that with you soon. Right. All right. What else? Okay, so that's all I have. Let's get started. Okay, so let's t talk about how is it that we can move a lot of the data structures and operations that we have already implemented in the user interface, right? How can we migrate all that to the server, right? Right now, we can create content in the user interface, right? We can create courses, we can create modules, but because all this is running inside of a browser, when you refresh the screen, all those changes go away, right? There's no way to permanently store any of that content, right? I mean, we could use, for instance, local storage, right? The browsers provide an API that allow you to store information in the browser, right? And it'll persist there, small amounts of data, but it's stored only for on that browser and only for that person, right? So you can't take it with you. It's not like you can log in from anywhere else in the world and see that information, right? Because it only lives on that machine, right? On that browser. Instead, a web application usually you think about it as being able to access it from anywhere in the world, right? As long as you log in and identify yourself, right, you would be able to access all that information from anywhere in the world, right? So that's what we want. We want to be able to store this information in a central server, in a central database, so that it can be accessed simultaneously from all sorts of places, right? So yeah, so let's start moving all the operations and data structures that we implemented in the user interface. We'll move it over to the server. Okay. So for instance, in the user interface, we had created, quote unquote, a database, right? That consisted with several JSON files, right, of courses and modules and users, right? And these are just arrays of objects, right? And then aggregated all that data into this one single file, right? And I mean, it works, right? We can log in as as Iron Man and whatnot, and it works locally on the browser, right? But ideally, all this information would live on the server instead. Okay, so let's move this database right over to the server. So basically, I'm just gonna copy this data structure, right? This entire directory, and I'm gonna move it over to my server, right? Node.js server. We're gonna create a Kanbas directory where we're going to implement all the server-side Canvas routes and data access objects and data structures, right? And in here, I'm going to paste my directory, my database directory. And so what we have here is basically the same data that we had on the client, but on the server. Now, the right now we don't have the server as being able to read raw JSON files like we have here. I mean, we can, but we need to set it up. I need to install a couple more libraries. So I'm kind of lazy, and so what I'm going to do instead is that I'm going to change the format. Right, I'm going to convert these all into JavaScript, right, files instead, and it kind of breaks it because these are not valid JavaScript files, right? These we need to convert this so that we can import them. We need to export and default all these, right? So same thing with all these. Let's see, users as well. I'm just going to rename these so they're JavaScripts, and I'm going to export and then default all these so they can be imported again. And let's see what else we have. We have modules as well. I'm going to rename this JavaScript, and we're going to add, export default. And finally, let's do enrollments as well. And we're going to export default. Okay. All right, so no, these are all JavaScript. Also, my index, it's also gonna import these, right? But instead of TypeScript, we're using just plain old JavaScript. So these are just JavaScript, and we're gonna import these. And these are JavaScript now, not JSON. Okay, so now we've basically moved the database from the client over to the server, and we need to be able to access all these things from the client, right? The client is no longer going to be using that database data structure on the React.js application. Instead, is going to have to come and fetch all this information from the server. We're going to have to create all sorts of routes, right, that are going to allow us to expose this data, right, out to the client so that we can integrate these two layers, right, using HTTP. The client is going to have to use an HTTP request to come and fetch the data that now lives on the server, right? Okay, so yeah, so we've moved the courses, right, and the assignments and the users and enrollments, right, into a database, right, on the server now, not on the client. So it's a little better, right? But eventually, what all this data really needs to live is on the database, right? So we'll do that in our next lesson. So for now, let's see. We want to make this data available to the client, right? And the way we do that is by creating routes around that. Okay? Right now, we're going to use a design pattern called the data access objects. And so a data access object is a strategy that allows us to encapsulate, right, or abstract, how is it that we retrieve data, right? Currently, we're going to be retrieving data through a file, right? But in our next lesson, we're going to be retrieving data from a database, yes, and so we want to hide the fact that our data source will change over time, right? So it could be a file, it could be next lesson, it will be a Mongo, and maybe in a month from a few months from now, or maybe next year, we are going to be migrating to MySQL or something. Yes. So we want to shield ourselves from these various implementations, these very low level choices, right? And kind of protect the rest of the application from these choices, right? So and the way we do that is that we're going to create an API, that we're going to centralize the fact that we are using either a database or file. We're going to centralize that decision into as few as possible places. In this case, it'll be just one file. Right? So this one file that has to deal with users, right, is going to know that it's reading the database from a file, right, and then it's going to expose the data through this API. We're going to be able to create users, find, retrieve all the users, delete users, update users, right? But next lesson, we are going to keep the same functions, but the implementation will be different. So today, the implementation will be using arrays, right, in this data structure. But next lesson, we're going to replace the implementation to use databases, right? It'll be a peculiar database. It'll be a MongoDB database, and maybe next year might be SQL Server, right? But because the rest of the application is using this interface, these functions, they are shielded from these decisions, right? They don't need to know whether you're using an array, or data structure, or it's a database, or whatnot, or maybe even a network, right? So let's do that. Let's create a DAO, data access object, for users that is going to interact and implement all the CRUD operations for users. Let's do that let's create a users directory under Kanbas. So here in the Kanbas, we'll do users now. There it is, right? And in there, we're going to copy, right, all the CRUD operations that have to deal with users, right? So there it is. So it's reading from the database, right? extracting the users, and it's implementing several CRUD operations. Creating a user means that you give me a user object that has presumably a username, password, first name, last name, whatever. Right? I'm going to add my primary key, right? And then I'm just going to append it to the users array, and then I'd return the new user that I just created. Find all users just retrieves the array. Find a user by primary key. It's just going to filter that user. Going to find and return that. Or I can search for the user by its username or by username and password. Update the user and delete the user. So basically, the CRUD operations. Right? Next lecture, right? And what we're going to do is that we're going to replace this with an actual database, right? MongoDB, right? But the functions are going to be the same, right? So anyone upstream that needs to interact with users is going to be shielded by our efforts to migrate this to a different database, right? All right. So now that we have the DAO that accesses the data structure, let's create some routes that is going to provide an integration point with the user interface. The user interface can send HTTP requests, right, to retrieve data, delete users, find users, try to sign in. Right, and we'll do that in routes, right? So we'll implement routes here for the user, and so some of these are going to be empty. Actually, they're all empty. So they're not implemented. We're gonna implement these as we go, right? And so here is the set of routes, right, that interact with the DAO that we just implemented, right? So we are importing the DAO, right? We are creating an instance of the user routes, right? And so these are the operations, right, for the that are using our DAO, right? Create user is going to use DAO.create user. Find all users will use DAO find all users, and they're all implemented up here. Okay, there they are. So these are the four operations that map very nicely to these DAO operations as well. Okay. So these are just integration points, right, that allow the user interface, right, to integrate with the backend. And then we have a few others over here that are going to use the same DAO, but right, they're going to use combinations of operations, right? So for instance, if you sign up, I need to go check to see first if the username that you're using is already taken. So I'll use, find user username, right? But then if the user doesn't exist, I'm going to have to create the user, right? So these are more complex operations that use combinations of DAO operations in the database. Yes. So yeah. Also notice that these are all post, right? And that they are not really RESTful APIs, right? Because notice we have verbs here, right? And one of the conventions in RESTful APIs is that we don't use verbs in the URLs, right? Also, even though here in sign in or profile that that could have been implemented as a get, right? Because we are retrieving, we are reading data from the server, right? We're going to prefer post, right, to implement anything that has to do with credentials, with security, right? It's much more secure. You can pass data across the body as opposed to encoding it in the URL. So yeah, and you can encrypt the data as well. So yeah, so we're going to implement all our security operations using post instead of get. All right. Okay, so as we progress throughout the assignment, you're going to be asked to implement each one of these actual operations. Right? All right, so let's so now we've created a route, and every time we create a route, we have to make sure to add that route to our app.js, right? So let's import our brand new user routes, right? And we are going to pass it an instance of app. Perfect. Okay. Once we have that, right, we should be able to go back to the route and start implementing sign in, sign up, right, on both the server side and on the client side. So on the server side, let's use the DAO, right, to see if we can find the user that has that username and password, right? So let's copy that. and our implementation of sign in is right here. And what we're going to do is that we're going to keep track of the current user on the server. Right now, we have that implemented in the user, right? In the user interface, right? Um, we have a reducer, right, for the account that keeps track of the current user. Well, we're going to move that logic, right, of who is the current user. We're going to move it over to the server, okay? And then now the client is still going to have to know who the current user is, but it's going to be managed on the server. The server is going to be our single source of truth, right? Or who is the current user, right? Instead, now the client is still going to have all those state variables, still going to have those reducers, but the data that lives on the client now be, is going to become a copy, right? A cached version, right, of the actual data that lives on the server, right? So Rose, now we're going to have the challenge, right, of making sure that the data is synchronized across two different layers, right? The user interface layer, right, and the server layer. The server layer will always be the final say of what the data actually is, right? But we need to notify the client of any changes, right? So yes, here's our current user, so we know who's logged in. And what we're going to do is that when you try to sign in, we're going to pass you an object with a username and password. We're going to post you, right, the sign in. We're going to post you an object in the body of the request, right? We're going to extract from there the username and password. We're going to use our DAO to see if that username and password matches, right? Is there anybody with that username and password combination? If so, right, we are going to populate the local current user, and we're going to basically log you in, right? So we can remember, oh, this user exists. We'll log you in. Notice I'm not handling any error messages. Whether we didn't find any user, we should throw back an exception saying 404 or 401, right? That username and password combination doesn't exist. But I'm trying to keep it as simple as possible, right? We can go back and start and adding some of the edge cases. So first let's consider the happy path, right? When everything works, okay? So we find the user and return the current user over to the client, so the client can then copy it in its reducer, right? And the reducer can then be used across multiple screens, right, on the client. All right, so we have that. So yeah, so let's now focus on the client side, right? On the account client, we're going to implement sign-in, right? So let's take a look at the account and okay, so we don't have a client, so let's create a client over here. Client.ts. Let's copy that. So what we're going to do is that we're going to use the Axios library that we played around with in our last lecture, right? Axios, if you remember, is a library that allows us to programmatically send posts, puts, deletes, gets, right, requests out to the server, and allows us to catch the response that's coming from the server. That's exactly what we're doing here, right? So we're going to remote server, we're going to go to localhost 4000 API users, and that's exactly where our server is listening at, right? API users, right? That's the URL that we're going to be using. That's the base of the URL to talk to the account resource, right? All right, so signing in basically is a post, right? There it is. We're posting the credentials. Presumably, credentials contain username and password, right? And hopefully, the response data is going to contain the current user, right? That is what we are responding here, right, from the server. All right. Okay, so let's try it out. Let's now refactor our screen, the sign-in screen. Right now we're not really signing in, right? So wait, what's oh we are in the wrong. Actually, we are we? What branch are we in? Git branch. Yeah, I think that's the correct branch. Give start. And sign in is not implemented. So let's implement that. Right, it's empty. So let's create I think from assignment 4, right? We might have done that. Right, so let's take a look at that. We use a reducer for that. Remember that? So we can graph from there. Right, we created some credentials, right? Let's grab that from there. We already have a link. And we don't have a reducer, so let's we'll have to grab that. All right, we have that. We have the credentials. And we have the input fields. So I guess we could just print the whole thing, copy the whole thing. There we go. And the reducer, the account reducer, we should also create that, right? So let's create that over here. And we should add that to the store. So let's load that up. The account reducer. And we'll add that here. Perfect. Okay. So once we have that, sign in is using the existing database in the user interface, right? So what we want to do, right, is replace the implementation that exists on the client in the React.js client. We want to replace it with the server, right? And so for that, right, what we want to do is that we want to use the client instead. We want to have the server do all that work, right? Instead of using the client side, right? So yeah, so let's do that in the sign in screen. Yeah, we're going to abandon the database. We don't want to do that anymore. Instead, we want to talk to the server through our client. Okay, we want to comment this out, and that's going to break. I know it's going to break that. See that? So instead of having the DB, right? What we want to do is that we want to go out to the server, right? Well, don't use this. Don't use this anymore. We want to go out to the server, and we want to do an async like that. Okay. All right. I think so, right? That works. So let's see if that works, right? Go to the credentials, sign in, blah, blah, blah. And then to confirm that this works, right, that's going to presumably take us out to the dashboard, right? And so let's try it out. Let's sign in with a user Ironman, let's say. Sign in, and it didn't work. Okay, it's network error. Let's do an inspect. Let's look at the network. Let's see. Network. Let's try it again. Ironman. Sign in. All right, sign in, fail. Is the server running here? Crashed. Okay, let's see. It does not provide export default. Oh, okay, so our database is not working. Okay, so DAO, let's see. DAO here. And export, I guess, default, is that the new implementation? Let's see. Our database. How do I implement the database? Did I export? Oh yeah, default. I forgot default. Okay. Export default. Let's try it again. And RMN. Sign in. Okay, so that seemed to be successful. Notice that our client came back from the server. Let's see the response. Okay, so this is what we sent over to the server, right? We sent out Ironman and the username and password, and the response, it's good, right? The server is responding, saying that that is indeed the user that was found in the database, right? But now the difference here is that the server is now remembering who is logged in, right? That the current user is Ironman, right? And so we unless we restart the server, it's going to remember this in perpetuity, right? As long as the server is running. So it's a better solution, right? It can survive a refresh, right? Well, not quite yet, right? Um, so yeah, we have the DAO integrating. We did the sign in screen. We went out to sign in like that, right? And we are storing it locally, right? Let's do all the other operations as well, like sign up and profile, right? And let's see. So in the DAO, we presumably have this implemented already. Let's check to see if that's true, right? In our DAO, right? We have what? Let's see. Create user is there. Perfect. It's there. And we just appends a new user at the end of the array. And file username by name, right? Is going my username, right? It's just going to filter to see or trying to find a user by their username, right? Okay. And so for considering that we have that implementation, we can implement the sign up, right, from the routes point of view, right, using this implementation. So let's do that in the route, right, in the sign up over here is going to first check to see if the username exists, right? If the username already exists, we don't want to have to create the user. We're gonna instead, send an exception, say, sorry, that username is already taken, try another one, and return right away. Now, if the username is not taken, right, we are going to use the body, right, as that you're providing the credentials when you are joining username and password, at least that. And the create user is going to make sure to add a primary key in the create. Yeah, create is going to provide a primary key, right? And it's going to append it to the array of users. And then we're going to make that the current user. So if you sign up, you are the current user now. You're logged in, right? So I'm not, once you provide the credentials and the credentials are good, right? I'm just going to log you in, right? Using those credentials. I'm not going to force you to log in after you create I think that's annoying. So you are currently your current user, and then I just respond with the current user. Okay? Now for on the client side, right? Well, we'll need to be able to if from the sign up screen, we'd have to be able to click on the sign up button, right, and send our new credentials, and so to the server. So to that end, right, on the client side over here, right, we are going to need a sign up, which is going to post the credentials. So these are the credentials for the user. It's going to send over to the server, right? Now from the sign up, right, we also did not implement sign up, right? So we'll have to borrow that from the fourth assignment. Although, did we do that from the fourth assignment? I forget. Sign up. Maybe not. So sign up looks very, very similar to the sign in. So maybe that's why I didn't give it to you. So we can just grab from sign in. We can grab credentials. Instead of sign in, will be sign up. Right, so this will be, we'll have to import this. We'll need a dispatch. And this will be sign up. Right, and this will be, we'll need to import the clients. So this will be import star from client, and this will be the sign up, right, and the credentials. And then down below, we need some input fields, right? So I'm just going to grab the input fields from the sign in. We can just borrow that from here with a username, password, right, and the button to sign up, right? And we want to navigate, so we'll grab that. So we'll copy that in here like that. Okay. This will be a button instead. I guess we can borrow that from here. Oops. So we'll change that, and this will be the sign up, and this will be sign up. There we go. And so this will allow me to toggle between the sign in and sign up, right? And okay, so let's see. The sign up, right? Instead of let's see, the implementation for this, for the sign up and the new assignment is that we are going to do this, which is, I think we were, I think that's what we have, right? Const current user, blah, 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 world user, credentials, and blah, blah. Yeah, that's it. Oh, in this case, we would go to the profile. So this will be account and then profile. Right. I think that's the only difference. Okay. Let's try it out. Let's see. So let's go back here. Let's go to sign up and sign up. Let's try QDOE and then 1, 2, 3. And then we'll do sign up, see if that worked. Because there's our sign up. We did send it over. Let's see the response. So the response, yeah, I created a new user with a new primary key and just username and password. Because that worked. Okay, so that it signed us up. Perfect, right? And it's in the reducer, right? So I should be able to say go to the dashboard, right, and retrieve the current user as well, right? All right, so we have sign in, we have sign up that has been moved over to the server. How about being able to update a user, right? Perhaps I want to change my first name, last name, things like that. Okay. And now for that, I don't know if they would implement the profile. Probably not either, right? So let's see. Sign in, dashboard, protecting. Here's the profile. All right, so let's copy the profile from the prior assignment. So let me. Do we have it? Let's see, profile. Yeah, so we didn't copy this. So let me copy it from here. Copy that. So we have a good starting point. There we go. Are we missing anything from here? I don't. It's good. All right. It's from assignment 4. So assignment 5 for the profile, right? Let's see. We just did the sign up. Let's do the updates, and that would be from the profile. From the profile, we need to be able to update the user once we log in. Okay. So yeah, so let's see, make sure that the DAO has implemented the update of the user in the array, right? So in the DAO, do we have that update? Yes, we do, right? This just swaps the user by user ID, right, in the array, okay, with any changes that might come in from the client side. Yeah, so we have that. And the routes, we're going to expose that operations through this route of the user, which is going to put for the new user ID, right? For an existing user ID, I'm going to send you a body that contains the changes that I want you to make, right? So yeah, so here in the update in the route, right? It's empty, it's not implemented. I'm just going to paste that in here. So basically, I'm going to check, parse the user ID from the route, right? I'm going to get the changes that you want to make from the body, and then I'm going to pass it to my DAL. Hey, modify this user with these updates, right? And once you're done, right, I'm going to retrieve the same user by user ID, which presumably contains the updated fields, right? The updated properties, and then I'm just going to respond with the user. Okay. So yeah, so that's on the server side, right? So on the client side, we're going to send a put, right? Because that's what the server is expecting, that I send a put, right, to modify the user, right? So that would be on the client, right? So that would be update user, which I would have to provide the primary key of the user that I'm updating, plus these are going to be the user object is going to contain all the fields that I am modifying. Maybe I'm modifying just my first name, my last name, my date of birth, my email, things like that, right? So on the screen, the profile screen, right? The current implementation, right? the current implementation doesn't really change anything, or let's see, sign out. Yeah, it doesn't actually change anything. So let's fix that, right? So we are going to import the client, right? So that we're going to be able to talk to the server. And then I'm going to have an update profile, which is going to go out to the server, say, hey, server, these are the fields I want to modify. Once it's been updated, I will, and you successfully come back from that update. I'm also going to make those changes locally on my reducer so that they're in sync, right? So that I tell the server, change my email, and then locally on my reducer, I'm also going to update that user's email, right, to make sure that these two users are in sync, right? So yeah, so on the profile screen, we're going to have an update function that's going to first tell the server, right, to modify the profile, and then I want to update my local reducer. Okay? And what we'll do is that we'll add an update button, right, to the profile. So next to the status. So next to the sign out, excuse me, which is going to call my update profile. Okay. All right, let's try it out. Let's see. So so sign in. We're going to go with oh, what happened to my Iron Man? Where'd it go? Okay, there we go. Iron Man. Sign in. Account. Profile. Okay, so there it is. So notice there's my Iron Man. This is the information that, as I signed up or I signed in, right? It stores it in the reducer, and the profile has the information, right, of the current user. But this is a cached version, right? That we, when we signed in, we put it in the reducer. So now if I go to the profile, I can retrieve the currently logged in user. If I refresh, it's going to go away, right? So we have to fix that. We have to make sure that even if I refresh, right, I can recreate the information, because the server still remembers who's logged in. It's just that I need to, if I refresh, I need to be able to recreate the state from the server, right? So how about the update? So let's say I want to update this, so instead of Tony, I'm going to say Antonio, right? So I say update, and it goes out, right? That the payload, right, that has a new first name, and the response is that indeed has been modified to Antonio. Okay, so if I sign out, right, and I sign in again with Ironman, and I do a sign in, and I go to my account profile. Notice that indeed has been updated correctly, right? Notice that if I refresh, I lose the information because the reducer loses that information, and it doesn't remember now the current user. The server still remembers who signed in. Okay, so if I sign in as Ironman, right, I go to my account profile. Notice that the changes are still valid on the server, right? So I didn't lose those changes. It's just that I need to make sure that they're in sync, right? So that I have my reducer updated all the time. Right? Okay, so yeah, I want to be able to make sure that, right, if I refresh this, right, I can recreate the state from the server. I don't want to just throw away the information from the reducer, right? So how do we do that? Well, the server is remembering who is logged in, the current user. So I'm going to expose that information through a route, right, that's going to respond with the current user. So yeah, so I can go fetch the current profile, right, and I'm just going to respond with the current user, right, so that I can recreate that in my cached version on the client, right. So I'm going to create a client request so that I can go fetch that information from the profile. Right? So in the client, I'll have, hey, I want to go fetch the profile. Who's currently logged in? Maybe nobody, right? And so what I want to do is that not only in the profile, right, do I want to recreate the user. Actually, if I refresh the screen from anywhere, even if I'm, say, logged in and then I'm in the dashboard or I'm looking at a module, what happens if I refresh the screen? So I don't want just the profile screen to remember who's logged in. I want the entire application to remember an access, right, and be able to recreate that state, right, of who's currently logged in. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to centralize um, that feature, right, that role of maintaining the copy or the cached, in sync with the server, right? I'm going to centralize it into session, right? I'm going to create a brand new component whose responsibility is to that, if you refresh the screen and now we lost the state in the client side, to go back to the server and say, hey, server, is this the first time that we're talking, or did I, there's nothing I remember. Was I logged in or not, right? And the server can respond, says, oh yeah, you were logged in. Here's the user that you were logged in as, right? Or the server might say, no, you never logged in with me. Okay, so okay, fine, right? But whether I'm actually logged in or not, right? I want to make sure that I can recreate that knowledge, right? If I refresh, because if I refresh, you start from zero, right? Everything's gone. It might be that you never had identified yourself with, or it might have been that you logged in. You don't know, right? Only the server can tell you, whether it remembers you having logged in or not. So I'm going to create a session uh, component that is going to wrap around the entire application so that if you do refresh, right, it'll go back to the server and say, hey, I want to recreate all that information that the server remembers, right, or the database in the next lesson. I want to recreate all that state here on the client side, right? So let's do that. So let's create in the account, session, and what it'll do is that what the session will do is that it's going to go to the server. It's going to go out to the server, unload. When this session first loads, right? It's going to go out to the server, fetch the profile, see this somebody logged in or not, right? And then copy it into the reducer so that for the rest for so that all other screens on the in the application will be notified. They all know whether somebody is indeed logged in or not, right? And so I notice now I'll take the children. So in the body, right, I'm going to put the rest of the application, our Kanbas application, is going to put it in the body, right? So that by the time this session figures out whether somebody's logged in or not, right, it'll propagate, for the remainder, for the rest of the application that is in the body of this session. So what we're going to do is that I'm going to take that session and I'm going to wrap it around Kanbas, right? So I'm going to import this in Kanbas. Kanbas here, and I'm just gonna wrap this around here. Oh, the provider's here. Um, that's a problem. All right, we're gonna fix that in a minute. So we're gonna put session here. Wait, did I just import that? Okay, and so session is gonna be like that. Okay. And now notice that the provider is implemented down here in the Kanbas. That's a problem, right? It's a problem because here in the Kanbas component, I want to be able to extract the current user. But the provider that knows who the current user is in here. It needs to be up above, a component above myself so that I can access and use a use selector, right? Because notice I can use selector here because my provider, right, is not above me. So I don't have the information of that. So I'm going to move the provider. Instead of having it here, I'm going to move it up one to the app. So I'm going to remove this from here. No provider here, and no store here either. Provider and the store. Instead, I'm going to implement that up one further in my app TSX. I'm going to wrap the entire application with this provider. So I'm going to say import store from, and so we're going to go to Kanbas store. Okay, and I'm going to import provider, and I'm just going to wrap this whole thing provider store. There we go. Perfect. Okay. All right. So now my entire application, right? Even my labs will know who's logged in. Although I don't care that the labs know that, right? But indeed, it's available everywhere. Okay. Okay. So we have that now, right? If I sign in as Ironman and I sign in like that, so I'm logged in, right? Notice if I go to account, I go to profile. If I refresh. Notice that it remembers now. See that? It goes, the first thing that it does is that it goes out to the profile. And so I refresh the screen, right? It goes out to the profile. It finds out that somebody is indeed logged in, puts it in the reducer. Now the entire application knows that somebody's logged in. Now if I sign out, right, then this would kick me out, right? And nobody signed in, right? It's going to kick me out to the profile, to the sign in screen, right? And so let's do that. Right? So let's implement the sign out. Right? And so on the server side, the sign out is trivial, right? It's just consists on blowing away the current user, right? So I'm just going to say current user null, it's gone. I don't know who's logged in now, right? And so from the client browser application, right? On the client side, sign out is going to be a post out to that endpoint, right? And then in the profile, right, screen, right, the button, there's a sign up button, right, that which I think it's a link right now, isn't it? So in the profile we have okay, no, it is a button, right, perfect. So it's gonna go the sign out here instead of using setting the current user null here only in the user interface. I want to clear it out also on the server, right? So yeah, so let's make this async here, right? And I'm going to tell the server, hey server, sign me out, right? And so now in both places, the server, the current user is null, and locally, my dispatcher, my reducer, the current user is also null in both places. So that is the challenge when you have multiple layers, right? That you have to make sure that they're both in the same page, right? That the same information that I know as the server is also true on the client, and the client is always at risk at um, showing something that is stale, right? That is no longer true. It was true, a few seconds ago, right? But it's no longer true, right? Which is, a very common challenge in, multi-tiered applications where you have, clients and servers, and especially when you have multiple users hitting the same server, right? And so we'll have to deal with that too. Okay. Yeah, we have to deal with multiple users. How is it that we handle multiple users? Right? So let's first check to see that sign out works. Let's see, sign in as Ironman, sign in. And so if I go to account, profile, and I sign out, right, it goes out. And if I refresh, notice that it doesn't work. If I go to profile, it's not even letting me go there because nobody signed in, right? Only if there's somebody signed in will it let me go in there. Okay. All right. Okay. Yeah. So let's now talk about uh, handling multiple users, because right now we only have a single user that can be logged in at any one time, right? Notice that if I log in as Ironman and I go in there, if I go to accounts and I go to my profile, right, there it is, Ironman, right? And I can refresh. But notice that if I go to if I use that same URL and I go to my Safari, where is my Safari? And I go to the same URL here, notice that Safari also tells me that I'm logged in as Ironman, right? So what's up with that? I'm going to the same server from two different browsers. Even if these would be running on different computers or even halfway across the world, hitting the same server, the server would say, yeah, the current user is Ironman, right? And notice that if I sign out here and then I go here and I refresh, notice that I'm no longer signed in. See that? So if I sign in as someone else over here, um, who can I sign in? The database of users. Let's sign in as Dark Knight. Right, Dark Knight and Wayne 123. And I sign in over here. And I go to my account, my profile. I'm the Dark Knight. And my over here, if I go to my profile and I refresh, I go to my profile, notice that I am signed in as the Dark Knight. So only one user can be signed in at any one time. So that doesn't work, right? So we need to be able to support multiple users. And for that, the server needs to be able to maintain multiple communications simultaneously with multiple clients. And remember, right, each one individually. Okay? So to do that, we're going to be using server sessions. Right? And we're going to be using cookies, right, to be able to distinguish one request coming from one browser from another request coming from a completely different browser. And each one is going to be given a token, which is referred to as a cookie. And that token will be different for each client. And as long as they provide that token out to the server can then distinguish which one request from another. Because HTTP on its own, right, is stateless, right? There's nothing in the protocol that allows you to distinguish one request from one browser coming from, uh, Western US, right, from the West Coast, from a request coming from Eastern Europe, okay? So to do that, we need to use cookies, right? So to do that, we need to turn on the FAT, right? Now, because we're using cookies for authentication and whatnot, we need to start, uh, you um, narrowing down, right, our scope of who are we allowing to communicate with us, right? So instead of just opening it up to everybody, right, we're going to start narrowing that. Says, okay, well, I only want to talk to this client application that I am building, right? I know that I'm the server side and you're the client side, and we're going to be talking to one another, not just anybody, right? So only us are going to talk to one another, right? So to do that in the course, we're going to configure and say, hey, we are going to be using credentials, right? We're going to be exchanging username, password, right? Tokens and whatnot, cookies for identifying, right? So I want to narrow down who I allow to talk to me, right? And so now locally on my machine, I know my client is running on port 3000, localhost 3000, right? So my origin, who I'm expecting the request to come from, is going to be localhost 3000. But remotely, when this gets deployed on Netlify, it will be the URL that comes from Netlify. Okay, that's where my client is running on Netlify, right? So let's narrow that down. Let's go out to the server and go to my app here, and we'll provide here, oops, an object like that. Okay, there we go. And also, we're going to install a new library that knows how to work with cookies, right? It's going to be able to parse cookies from the HTTP headers that come from different browsers, and for each new cookie, it'll create a new session object, right? And that session object will be different for each cookie. Meaning, if you're coming from Safari, you'll have one cookie, so I'll instantiate a session object for that on the server. I'll instantiate a session object for the cookie that comes from Safari, right? But if the request comes from Chrome, right, I'll instantiate a different session object, right? And I'll use the cookie, as a key to know which session object are you talking about, right? And so the session object, right, by the time the request comes to you and arrives at your express, get, post, put, delete, you get a session object. Now that session object will be either the session object that is mapped to the cookie from Safari, or right, it's mapped to the cookie that's coming from Chrome, right? So by the time you gets to you to your get, post, put, delete, and your sign in, sign out, profile, whatever, your session object will already be figured out for you. You don't have to. We're not gonna have to do that from scratch ourselves, right? Of saying, oh, which cookie is mapped to what session. That's done for you automatically by the time it gets to your express route. Okay, so let's install the library, right? And let's start configuring it. And we're gonna import that. So let's restart the application. And so in here we're gonna import the Express session, and we're gonna create, after the course, right? It has to be after the course. Careful in this order, right? We are going to create a session option like that. Here, so there's Express, there's course, right? And right here, like that. So after the course, right, we're going to create the session and we're going to say, hey, for each request that comes in, so this is what we're saying. We're saying, hey, for each request that comes in, right, check to see if there's a cookie. That's what we're saying here, right? It says, okay, well, if there is a cookie, check to see if I have already instantiated a session object for that cookie. All right. If it doesn't exist yet, create a new session object. Okay, and add the session object to the request. Right? So that means that by the time you get to your post, right, in the request object, there will be a new session object, right? Just like this request body, request params, request query. Now there's going to be request session. Right? That's a new session object, and it's going to work just like a hash table. I can put anything in there, right? And for instance, what we're going to be using it is to remember the current user. Because right now there's only one current user, but now we can have multiple current users, each one mapped to its own session, right? So that's how we're going to fix the fact that we want to have multiple users, right? Each one with its own session. Okay. All right. So what else? Now we do want to configure the netlify and all that. We want to configure it so that it behaves one way locally, but it behaves a different way when it's deployed on Heroku or AWS or whatever, right? So let's we need to be able to, and we're going to use environment variables to be able to have different values, configured either locally or when it deploys to render.com, right, or Netlify. So let's load a library that can read the environment variables. So it's .env, and let's create a new environment variable file. You have to careful. This needs to be at the root here, at the root over here, right? Not inside of any directory, so it needs to be here, .env, like that. And we're going to put in there the values that we want locally, right? We're going to restart the server. So locally, right, so we're going to have an environment variables that tells us what environment are we in. We are in the development environment, right? But remotely, when this gets deployed to render.com, it has to be something other than development, right? Production, QA, right? Something like that. Now, locally, our React application is running on localhost 3000, right? So that's what this says, right? Where's my client application? I guess a better name for this would be maybe React, not Netlify. Because I mean, it could be deployed anywhere else, not necessarily Netlify. But when this guy gets deployed on Heroku or AWS, right? This URL would be the URL that comes from from where your Netlify is deployed, your React application, right? Then remote server needs to know where I'm running, right? My server, and I'm running on localhost 4000. But for you, right, when you deploy it on render.com, it'll be Kanbas something something something, render app.com, right? So that domain. Now it has to be the domain, not the URL. So it needs to be without HTTP. Okay? Then some session secret could be something super secret, just like a password. We just don't want to have it hard-coded in the source, so we put it here. And eventually, in the next lecture, we'll talk about being able to connect to a database. And so we need to know, where the database is running. So locally here in our machine, it'll be, running locally on, 27,017. But when this gets deployed on render.com, it'll be running somewhere else in MongoDB or something. Okay. So anyway, yeah. So let's load up that the .env that to parse out that env file that we just created. Right? Let's do a .env like that. So that reads it in. And so now our origin here, right, it's going to read the netlify from the environment variable we just declared, which is good. Let's see. I think I just have that already. Yeah, okay, never mind. So now our session options is going to be just a slightly more sophisticated now that it behaves one way if it's local or behaves slightly different if it's deployed, right? So I'm just going to replace these two. We'll replace that. So it's a secret, it's that password, right, that we have here. It could be anything, but I just didn't want to have passwords, written out in the source code. Now, if you forgot, right, what the password is, and you mistyped it, I'm always going to default to some bogus password. And then also here's where we check to see if we're running locally, right, or if we're deployed to render.com. Right? So locally, we know that the environment node-env is development, right? So that means that locally, we're not going to do this. Okay, locally, we don't care for this. But when it gets deployed to render.com or Heroku, then we do want to do this, right? We need to turn on a proxy. We need to turn on the secure, right? Also, we need to be able to configure and say, what domain, what IP address are we running on locally, right? So that's the node server domain, right? Yeah, let's see. Now that we have that, we can go back now and re-implement, right? The sign in, sign up, profile, sign out, right? All those four functions, right? That currently are using the current user variable and replacing it with our brand new REQ session. Right? That's a brand new object that now it's available that is different, right? This object session is different from, if you're coming from Chrome or Safari, right? Or any one of the millions of browsers that are now going to be hitting the server. Each one is going to have its own session, right? So let's do that. So here, let's go back to the routes and the user. We're no longer going to have this current user over here. So this breaks the server, right? Because it's being used here, right? It's being used here, here, and here, right? So now these are all going to become local constants, right? Const here, right? So instead of being this global, right? And also here we're going to have a brand new const user like that. Null for now. But let's re-implement these current user. So let's start off with sign up. So sign up, right? First, the current user becomes a const. But now instead of having this current user that it would remember the value, instead I'm going to store it right in the session. Request that session, and then I'm going to store it in a key. It's whatever I want it to be. I'm hard coding it to be current user. So it's just like a hash table. I can put stuff in there, and it'll still be there, right? As long as the server keeps running for the same cookie, it'll always have the same request session. Right? So if it's a different cookie because it's coming from Safari, this will be a different session. So if Alice comes in, right, and she signs up, then I'm going to store the current user for Alice's cookie. But if Bob comes in and he signs up, it'll be a different cookie. So it'll be a different session here. See that? Right? So it'll be a different object is stored in that session because it's Bob's session as opposed to Alice's session. Make sense? So same thing with sign in. For sign in, we're gonna do const current user, const current user, and we're gonna check to see is there a current user. If so, I'm gonna store it locally, right? If there is a current user, then I'm gonna respond. Otherwise, right? If the current user doesn't exist, I'm gonna respond with an error. Okay, so if the current user, I'm going to store it in the session and I'm going to respond and return, I guess. Although I don't have to, there's nothing else that I'm doing. Or otherwise, right, I'm going to send back an error for one, say unauthorized, that user doesn't exist, right? Profile also, right? Now in the profile, I'm going to grab the current user from the session, right? So I'm going to grab it from the session, and then first I'm going to check to see if the current user actually exists. If it doesn't, I should send back an error. So if it doesn't exist, I'm going to send back a 401. I'm going to return, right? Otherwise, if the current user does exist, I'm just going to send it back to the client. And finally, sign out, right? I'm going to destroy the session. Right? So I'm going to throw away the object, whatever you had in there. It was for the cookie that person was using, but I'm going to deprecate that cookie. That cookie is no longer good. If you try coming back with that same cookie, I'm going to reject it, right? So there's no way for you to, impersonate anybody, right? So I'm just going to destroy the session and come back with 200, right? So now on the client side, right? Update user. Oh, say update user too. You have to make sure update user because if I'm updating myself, right, and I change my first name, my email, whatever, my phone number, locally because I edited. Yes, it's going to change the data in the DAO, but if if I was logged in and my information was already stored in the current user, I have to make sure that that gets updated as well, right? So in the routes for the updates, so current user, yeah, we did that. I'm just going to make sure that I update the session as well. Otherwise, right? Um, it might be that I changed it, it's changed in the database, right? But my session still thinks that I am Tony as opposed to Antonio. Okay. Now on the client side, because now that we're using sessions, we're using cookies. The Axios library by default doesn't know how to use cookies, right? By default, it has cookies turned off, right? So we need to turn that on. We need to tell the browser, hey React.js application, the server is expecting you to talk to it with cookies so that it can distinguish between multiple clients simultaneously, right? So what we're gonna do is that in the client side, right? Axios by default does not use cookies. So we're gonna create an instance of Axios, a brand new instance of Axios that turns on cookies, right? By setting credentials to true, right? And so now all our requests, right? Instead of using the simple Axios, which doesn't use cookies, is going to use this new version, right? So use Axios. So anytime you need to do an operation and talking to the server and you need to the server to remember and be able to distinguish a sign in from from Chrome and another sign in coming from Safari, right? You need to use an Axios that has credentials, right? That it's going to include, right, the cookies, right? All right, there we go. All right, so let's try it out. So here, let me sign out and sign in here with Ironman. So sign in. Account profile. Okay, so I'm signed in with Ironman. Very good. And let me try the same thing with Safari. Wait, here's Safari. And let me sign in as Dark Knight. I forget the username. It's hard. So Dark Knight. Dark Knight and Wayne. Sign in. Account. Profile. Dark Knight. There we go. And now if I go here and I refresh, notice that the server remembers that you are Iron Man. And over here, if I refresh, right, right? Notice that it still remembers that it's dark night. So the server can now maintain conversation with two clients simultaneously, right? Each one with its own information, right? Displaying, the courses for Ironman, which are separate from the courses for Dark Knight, right? It's maintaining two different conversations. It remembers that, that knows that to send the right information to, for the correct user. Okay. All right. Let's take a short break, and we come back. We'll continue, working with the other data structures. Okay. All right. All right. Can you hear me? All right. Yeah. So we're able to, log in as multiple users, right, using the access with credentials and using cookies. Okay. All right. So let's take a look at implementing other resources, right, such as courses, modules, assignments. We've moved over those JSON files, right, and made them available on the server, and so we need to, make them available, as routes, right, so that the front end, right, can come and retrieve all that data, right, and because the server is now going to be the single source of truth, right, and we already have in place in the user interface, reducers, state variables, and whatnot, but the data no longer lives on the client, right? Now it lives on the server, and eventually later on, next lecture, right, it'll live in the database. So it needs to go fetch all that data and then copy it and cache it, on the client, right, so that then the user interface can render it, right? But it needs to be accessible through the server. So for that, right, we're going to create a DAO, right, that is going to encapsulate all the CRUD operations for courses, right, manipulating the data structures or data sources on the server, right? Right now, it's just going to be a file, right, in the database index.json, right, JSON JavaScript files. But next lecture is going to be a database, right? So let's do that. So under Kanbas, right, we're going to implement a DAO for the courses, right? That's going to have all the CRUD operations for the courses. So for right now, we're just going to retrieve all the courses, right, which is that are in the database. We'll create a route that will allow the user interface to interact, to integrate, right? So basically, it's just basically, importing the DAO, right, and exposing the courses at this URL, /API/courses. It'll be able to retrieve all the courses from the server, just DAO, find all courses and just send it back, right? And every new route that we create, you have to remember to go back to your app.js and import that new route. So import, courses routes, right, and then pass in an instance of the Express library. So now we should be able to access it. We should be able to go to localhost 4000, right? API courses, and then we have the courses that we moved over from the client, right? And yeah, courses. Yeah, we imported those courses. We made it available. So how about the fact that when you go to a dashboard, typically you don't see all the courses. You only see the courses for which the current user is logged in, right? It says, well, you should be able to see not only not all the courses, but depending on who the user is, right? So let's implement another version called find courses for enrolled user, right? So what we'll do here is that in the DAO, right, let's implement another version of this in the DAO. That what it's going to do is that it's going to take, not only take the courses, but it's also going to look at the enrollments from the database, right? And it's going to do the filter so that based on the current of the user ID that you pass in as an argument, it'll filter out only the courses that for which that user is enrolled in. Okay, and so now the question is, okay, well, this needs to be made available to the client for integration purposes, right? But so where would it go? Well, first you would think they would go here, right? It would look something like this. Let's it would the URL will look something like that, perhaps, right? And the function might be called, find courses for enrolled users. So you have the function here, like that. So that would be the function like that, right? But notice look at the URL though. The URL says, okay, well, given the user ID, and then I want the courses within that user for that user. So it looks like the navigation here, the path, right, illustrates the fact that we're going from a higher level context. Excuse me. Excuse me. We're going from a higher level context, right, where you have the user, and then all the things that are associated to that user. You first have to give me the larger context, which is the user, and then once I know the user, right, you can tell me, you can ask me anything you want about that user, right? In particular, I'd like to ask you what the courses are, right? But first I have to identify the user, okay? So based on this URL, right, it's not gonna match with the other URLs that are accessing information about courses. This is really a subset information about a user. Right? So the proper place for this, because we have routes that have to do with users, is really in the users router. Right? In the users router, right, is where we have, right, all the APIs that have to do with users, right? API users sign up, blah 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 blah. So a more appropriate place to put this, right, is not here, but over here, right? Because again, it follows the URL pattern, right? Is that this is an information about a user, of which courses happens to be, one aspect of that user, right? So in that case, we're going to implement it here, right? So here's the implementation, right? We're going to put it in here, and what we're going to do is that, well, first going to check to see if you are sending a user ID, and it could be that I'm not going to provide you with an ID, but I just want to say, well, whoever is currently logged in, I don't have an ID for you. I just say I just want the information for the person that's currently logged in, right? So if I send you an ID, because maybe I'm logged in, but I want to see his courses, right? As an assistant administrator, my ID might be 123, but I want to see the courses for another user 234. So I might send you the ID of the user that I want to see, or I might want to be just to see the my own courses. So if I want to see my own courses, whoever I am, right, I could be Alice or Bob or Dan logged in. So I would pass in the ID as current, right, and then you would know, right, from the current user who that person is, and then the user ID would be the ID of the person who's currently logged in. But if I'm Alice and I want to see Bob's, then instead I would actually send you the ID of Bob, right? And I'm logged in currently as Alice. So if that's the case, then it would not be current. It would be Bob's ID. In that case, the user ID already has a correct value, and it would go out and both of them would use the same find courses for enrolled user. Okay. So yeah, so we're going to expose that. Now, because we are implementing this in the user routes, user route only has the DAO for the user DAO, right? But our function is using the DAO for the courses, which we don't have, right? So we'll need to import that, right? It's a different DAO that talks to the database, right? So this would be import DAO. So it's going to go up one and then down to the DAO. Perfect. Okay. All right. Cool. So what about in the client? Client, the when we are retrieving information that is specific to just courses, then yes, it would totally go in the courses client, right? Which I don't know if we have that. Let's see, account courses. We don't, right? So for instance, if you're asking to retrieve all the courses, then yes, right? That's not within the context of any user, right? It's just all the courses, right? So yeah, so that there it would make sense to implement the find all courses here because the URL only contains courses, right? That is the highest level of context. But if you're implementing the retrieving my courses, then that is within the context of a user, right? So a better implementation for that route would be in the client, right? That is for the users or the account or the right whoever's logged in. So let's implement that find my courses, and notice it'll use current, right? Because it's my courses, whoever's logged in, right? So let's do that in the account client. So my courses. All right. And so what else? So we have that. And so where do we fetch the courses? So currently the courses are being fetched where? Right now, all of that is implemented in the state variables in Kanbas. So Kanbas is the one who is currently using the database, right, to fetch the courses from the database, right? But instead, right, these courses need to come from the server, not from the local database. We need to comment this out, right? We are no longer using the database, right, in the React application. We're using the database from the server's point of view, right? So we're no longer going to be using this DB courses or anything like that. Everything comes from the server, right? So that's going to break this, right? Use any, right? Because we're not using DB anymore, right? So let's fix that. So instead, we're going to comment out of the database. Instead, we're going to use the clients, either the courses client or the users client, right? So here, let's import that here. And what we're going to do is that we're going to fetch the current user, fetch the current user here, right? We'll need to import uselector. And what else? We're going to unload if a user has changed, right? Somebody else has logged in and whatnot, right? I am going to go fetch the courses, right? Using my user client, I'll find my courses, and then I'll set the courses locally on my state variable, right? So let's do that. So unload, I'm going to go to the server and fetch the courses, right? My courses. So we'll add that right here, like that, right? And we'll need to import this. There we go. And so this set courses should be initialized to be empty. See that? So we're no longer going to initialize this with the local array. We're just going to empty that out. Initially, it's empty. I'm going to go out to the server, fetch the courses, and I'm going to populate the state variable locally on my user interface. Right? So now if I go here, I might need to, let's see, set courses, blah, blah, blah. I might need to say that this is any. Okay, there we go. So who's logged in? Nobody's logged in. And I'm gonna use maybe Ironman. Sign in. Okay, so this dashboard, right? It's showing, presumably, right? If I see courses here, these courses are coming out RS 101, 102, presumably because Ironman is enrolled in those two courses. Let's see if that's true. from the database, we have users. So Ironman is 1, 2, 3. And if you go to enrollments, right, we have, yeah, Ironman is 1, 2, 3. It's enrolled in 101 and in 102. Okay. In the courses, I only have 3 courses, 1, 1, 2, and 3. Okay, so it's working, right? Excellent. Yeah, so in the dashboard, we have to make sure, right, that to remove the filter, actually, right, all that goes away, right, because now we're doing the filtering on the server side, not the client, right? So let's do that. Let's make sure we don't do any of that here. So that filter, okay, I must have removed this at some point. And we're not using the database anymore. That's gone, right? Because we moved that over to the Kanbas application. Perfect. Yeah, we don't have that. We don't have enrollments. Do we have enrollments here? We don't. Okay, perfect. Excellent. Yep. All right. How about creating new courses, right? Now, for the courses in the DAO, is going to implement the manipulation of the database, which is going to create a new element in the array of courses. So let's do that. So create courses in the DAO. Right, so let's go to the DAO for the courses. Right now we are just reading courses. Let's create a course. So basically we're going to pass in an object for a course. We're going to enhance it with a primary key, right? And then we're going to append it at the end of the array, right? Now for the route, now we have to be careful because now that we're going to be able to create courses, right? We also need to make sure that so that the faculty who's creating the course is enrolled in the course, right? So that otherwise they won't see the course they just created, right? So let's create another DAO, right, that manipulates the enrollments, right, and make sure that this new course, right, is enrolled, right, with the user. So let's create a DAO for enrollments, right, and in there we're going to retrieve from the database. We're going to retrieve the enrollments, and we're going to append to the enrollments a new object, right, that associates the user with the course. Right? So it's just appends it. That's all it does, right? Now in the route, again, because we are working with creating a new course, we would we could decide that the integration point would live in the routes for the course because we are creating new courses. But because the URL, right, the course is created within the context of the author, right? Because I'm creating it, right? It's we don't create courses in the ether, right? Outside of a context. I guess we could. If you're a system administrator, you could create a course outside of the context of who's logged in, because I can create a course, but I'm not the author, right? So I mean, so it's debatable, right, where this might go. But the meaning here is that the author creates the course, so I need to know the current user, right, and that's the author. I need to enroll that person, right? So it's within the context of the author, right? So yeah, so in the routes, right, where we retrieve my courses, we did that in the user routes. I'm also going to add the create courses in there because it's within the context of the user. The URL starts with users. Okay, so let's grab the DAO in the user routes, and some of these decisions are somewhat arbitrary, right? It's just following convention. In the end, right, you can either add them here to the user routes or the courses route, wherever you feel makes more sense, but you should be consistent, right? So you might say, well, that anything that has to do with CRUDing courses, I'm going to put it in the courses route, right? Regardless of whether it's within the context of a user or not, right? It might be so, but once you make that decision, just be consistent, right? Everything that has to do with the enrollments, I'll put it in the enrollments. Everything that's with courses, I'll put it in the courses, and so on and so forth, right? So I'm following the criteria that, right, that if it's within the context of a user, then it should be in that particular route, right? But you might decide other criteria makes more sense, how you organize your routes. Okay. So yeah, so let's add the create here as well. So I'll put it down here. So I'm creating the courses within the context of the current user, which presumably it's the author. Right? So I'm going to create the user using the course DAO, but then I'm going to use the enrollments, right, to enroll that current user with this new course, right? And then I'm just going to return the new course. And the URL that I'm going to map it to is API users current and then courses. Okay. So now in the front end, right, also in the clients for the account, right, I'm going to add a client function, right, that's going to create the course, also within the context of the current user. So in the account client, so yeah, so here's my if you find my course, for current, and then this one create a course, for current, right? And then in the Kanbas, right, where we add the course, right, that it was adding it only the user interface. We now need to go out to the server so that it creates it on the server, right? So it's more permanent, right? So we'll go to the Kanbas index here. So where we create the course. So here's the add course. Now no longer are we just adding it locally to our local state variable, but also to the server, right? So this new course, instead of just appending it to a local variable, right? We are instead creating it, but from the remote server. The remote server is creating the course, right? And then I'm appending it to my local state variable. Okay. So let's try it out. Let's see. Probably need to log in. Account. So Ironman, I'm going to create the course. So sign in. So there it is. So rock propulsion. So I'm going to create it. It says maybe how to win the Infinity War. So let's clear that out. Let's see, add. Work. Okay, so I created it, right? I created the course on the server. There it is, and that's the response. It added an ID, and so now if I refresh, because I'm still logged in, and refresh, it should return the course that I just created because I am enrolled in it. Otherwise, I would not see it. I notice that even if I sign out, profile, I sign out, and I refresh, and I kill the browser, come back tomorrow, and I sign in as Ironman, right? The dashboard still shows that is the course that I am logged in. Now, this is as long as the server's running, right? If I restart the server, I lose all that. Right? That's why in the next lesson we're going to learn, how to use a database to do this. Today we're learning how to integrate the user interface with the server, right? To expose algorithms and data manipulation, right? Through RESTful APIs so that they can be integrated with the server, with the user interface. So next lecture, right, we're going to say, okay, well, instead of having these data structures that live on JavaScript files, right, those really should be either on relational tables, right, or non-relational collections in a database, right? So that's the next lesson, all right? How about deleting a course, right? Now, deleting a course, not necessarily it needs to be within the context of any user. I could delete a course, someone else could be deleting a course, so it's not within a context. So that one can totally be within the route of the course, right? So that's where I'm going to implement it. Right? So let's create the delete course. We'll put it in the courses DAO. So in the courses DAO, fine, blah, blah, blah. So basically, it's just you grab the enrollments, make sure that not only do you filter out the courses and update the array of courses, but also remove the enrollment as well, right? For that course, right? So anybody who might be enrolled, there might be a whole bunch of students that are enrolled, right? And so we want to remove that. Also, any author, no no evidence that this course ever existed. And so of the integration point, I'm going to put it in the courses route as opposed to the user's route, right? So the courses route, there it is. So here's the delete. Notice that, again, the API starts with courses. So again, that's my criteria, right? If it starts with courses, it goes in the courses route. The only thing that I'm passing along is the ID of the course, so I can know how to remove it and use the DAO to delete the course, right? Now in the user interface, right, again, because it only has to do with courses, I'm going to put it in the courses client, right? So in the courses client, let's see, count courses client, I'll put the delete, right? So again, anything that starts with API courses, right, goes in this client. I'm passing the ID of the course that I want to remove. I'm passing as an argument, right? So I can, now the delete course that already deletes the course from the user interface needs to also tell the server that to delete the course again to maintain this in synchronicity, right? Not only am I updating the local data structure, but I'm also need to, update it in the remote server, right? So I'm going to bring in the client from the Kanbas, I believe. Yeah, Kanbas index. Right, we'll bring in the client. So we already have the user client. Now we have the courses client, right? And in my delete, right, this will become async because I'm talking to an asynchronous server, right? And then I'm going to, send a request, a delete request out to the server to remove that course, right? And then we'll come back and then grab a status. Now, ideally, this status would be used as a part of an algorithm or logic on whether I update my local state, right? Now, if this status is successful, right, then I would remove it locally. But if it failed because somehow I passed you the wrong ID and the course was not removed, then right, I want to make sure that if it was unsuccessful in the remote server, it's also unsuccessful here on the client. I'm not doing any validation here, so but certainly you should definitely look into that, right, and making sure that you're guarded against wrongful updates. Okay. Updating course, right? So there it is, update course. Again, in the DAO, because this is not within the context of any user, right? It makes sense to obviously put it in the DAO. Also in the route, again, because the URL starts with /courses, right? It has no user ID whatsoever, right? It can live in the courses route, right? So in here, right, the only thing that I'm passing as a parameter, right, is the ID of the course, right? Again, it makes sense to put it in the courses client, right over here, because that doesn't mention any user, any enrollment, any nothing, just the idea of the course, right? So now we're going to update the canvas where we do the update. So here's the update course. It's going to be an async, which locally, right, it updates this local state variable, but remotely also needs to update, right? It needs to tell the server, hey, server, before I update the local user interface, you update your remote data, right? And again, usually I would capture here the status and whether we're successful or not. Right? If it was successful, that I know guaranteed the server did remove or updated the course remotely, then I would go ahead and update the local copy, right? Okay. All right. All right. I'm going to leave it here. You know, certainly continue the work on finishing up modules. I think you get the hang of it, right? The how is that the decision on whether it goes one on route or one DAO, right? So follow that. Also assignments, you'll do that on your own. Right? So this is the assignments that you have been implementing in the last several assignments, right? Same thing, enrollments and people table is optional, right? I'll leave it up to you on whether you want to implement it, if you want to practice some more. Okay. All right, let's do let's do some office hours.